Hello, I'm Dr Deane-Peter Baker. I have the privilege of teaching here at UNSW Canberra. As you can see, it's not your average university. UNSW Canberra works in close partnership with the Australian Defence Force Academy to educate future officers of Australia's Army, Navy and Air Force, as well as exchange cadets and midshipmen from around the world. An essential part of the curriculum here is teaching these future military officers about ethics for the military profession. That's a responsibility that my colleagues and I take very seriously. In fact, we can honestly say that we have one of the strongest programs in military ethics anywhere in the world. We work hard at giving our students conceptual tools that can help them deal with challenging ethical situations. We also help them think through issues that are particular to the military profession. If those are issues that are of interest or professional relevance to you, then join me. But we won't be confined to a classroom like this. I'm inviting you to join me on a trip that will take us literally around the world as we explore key issues of military ethics. So let's go.
Thanks, Dean. And I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody, and in particular welcome to Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, who's a Senator for Tasmania from the Greens, and I would say more importantly, UNSW Canberra graduate. Tonight we're here for the Senator to launch our military ethics MOOC and to have a panel discussion relating to military ethics. This is a really important thing for UNSW Canberra. We've been here in Canberra at the Australian Defence Force Academy and before that at the Royal Military College at Duntrude for nearly half a century. And in that half century, we've educated a very large number of the officers of the Australian Defence Force. And while a lot of what we do in that education is exactly what you would find anywhere else in the Australian university sector, there are some nuances in that education which are very strongly focused on the future role that our students will have. And one very important part of that is around military ethics. And in the discussion later this evening, we'll be able to go into some of the reasons of why that's important. I'd like to thank here the Vincent Fairfax Leadership in Ethics Foundation. They gave us a grant a number of years ago, which got us our first staff in this area. And since then, we've expanded that, so we now have 3 academics who are working full-time in military ethics as part of our International Political Studies program. So today we're here to launch the first massively open online course in military ethics. This will be the second MOOC that UNSW Canberra has run. The first one was in systems engineering. And I've got a challenge here for Dean. That course, when it was run at the same time as ANU ran a MOOC with a Nobel laureate as the front man. And I was delighted to observe that we got more students than they did. So my apologies, John. So Dean has been instrumental in setting up this MOOC. You've seen his handsome face in the video, and Dean's been with us now since 2012. Before which he was an assistant professor of ethics in the Department of Leadership, Ethics and Law at the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. And before that, an associate professor of ethics at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. He served briefly in the British Army, which is why he looks so comfortable around all the military hardware, and in the South African Army Reserve before he resigned in 2009 with the rank of Major. What Dean's able to do is to bring together his expertise in military strategy and ethics. And that's really important in terms of this particular MOOC. So without further ado, please welcome Dr Deane-Peter Baker to introduce the MOOC.
Thank you very much. One of the great things about working in this field is that you get to meet some really impressively brave people. One of the people that I interviewed for the MOOC was repelled, as a 19-year-old ranger, repelled into the crash site of the first Black Hawk that went down in Mogadishu in '93. And I could go on with many other examples of really brave people that I've met, some of whom are actually here tonight, and I won't point them out to embarrass them, but there are some people who've done some very brave things. But I want to talk about a different kind of bravery, and I'm going to single out my head of school, Professor David Lovell. Imagine the scene. I knock on his door, and he says, "Come on in," and I said, "David, I want to make something called a massive open online course. It's a course that's going to take quite a lot of resources, and we're going to give it away for free." And he said, you can imagine the look on his face, and he says, "Carry on. It's going to require that I it's going to take up a big chunk of my teaching load, and I'm going to ask for funding to do a 2-month round-the-world trip so I can film on location and interview people as I go." Pause. And he says, "And how much experience do you have with making videos?" "Well, none. I've watched quite a few." So it took a lot of courage to back this, and thank you very much, David. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I know my face is up there a lot, and I feel a little awkward about that, because in a way this isn't really about me. I've played a kind of coordination role, but as you'll see in the example of one of the nearly 40 videos we have in this course, what I've done all the way through is draw on experts other than myself, experts in different fields, a lot of them in ethics, but some of them are practitioners. So what I'm going to do now is just show you one of the videos from the course. I think it gives quite a good flavour. It's a video that's dealing with part of what's called the jus ad bellum, the justice of going to war, and there are 6 principles, and this just addresses the first 3 principles, which are deontological in nature. In other words, they're principle-based rather than, shall we say, consequences-based, which the other 3 are. If that sounds all very complicated, hopefully I'll explain it better in the video. So sit back, it'll take about 10 minutes, and it'll give you a flavour of what we've managed to produce. I'm in Milan, fashion capital of the world. This is the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, one of the world's oldest shopping malls. But I'm not really here for the fashion. Let's face it, I can't afford any of this stuff on an academic salary anyway. The place I want is next door. It was here in Milan that one of the central figures of Christianity was converted in 386, and that is the church father, St. Augustine. For our purposes, he's important because he's recognized as a key figure in what's known as just war theory. While there certainly were earlier writings in several religious traditions about the question of what makes a war just, Augustine gave the first in-depth answer to this question, and is generally recognized as the father of just war theory. I'm here in the beautiful city of Delft in the Netherlands to introduce you to another key figure in just war theory, Hugo Grotius. But it's a little tricky today because the students from the Technical University of Delft are busy building a record bridge out of beer crates. Just war theory is without question the dominant way of assessing the ethics of armed conflict, and that wouldn't have been the case if it had remained only a doctrine of the Christian Church. This statue is of the Dutch jurist Hugo Grotius, who in the early part of the 17th century played a critical role in separating just war theory from its roots in Christian theology. Today, much of just war theory has been incorporated into international law. Strictly speaking, just war theory is probably better thought of as a tradition rather than a theory, as there is some variation across time and across thinkers as to the exact detail of what constitutes the just war. Nonetheless, there is broad agreement regarding the theory's central principles. A key distinction is between the ethics of going to war, which is called jus ad bellum, and ethical conduct in war, which is called jus in bello. In this video and the next, we'll focus on jus ad bellum, the ethics of going to war. Now, most commentators agree that there are 6 principles of the jus ad bellum. 3 of them are deontological and 3 are consequentialist. We're going to start by focusing on the deontological principles. A useful example to illustrate the principles of jus ad bellum is the 1991 Gulf War that took place here in Kuwait to drive out the invading and occupying Iraqi forces.
On the 2nd of August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait and announced its intention to annex it and make it part of Iraq. The UN Security Council immediately passed a resolution saying that this was an act of aggression and had to be undone. Negotiations to find a peaceful end to this crisis failed, and in January of 1991, a US-led coalition began an air campaign against Iraq. This was followed by a ground invasion to liberate Kuwait, and after a short ground war, Iraq was ejected from Kuwait.
The first and most important of the jus ad bellum principles is just cause. Historically, there were numerous causes that were considered to be justification for going to war, but now we really only just have one, and that is resistance against aggression.
The issue of just cause was followed in the 1991 Gulf War. The UN Security Council Resolution 660, which was put out within hours of the invasion on the 2nd of August, enunciated that this was an act of aggression and called on the state of Iraq to withdraw immediately from Kuwait.
The second principle of the jus ad bellum is the idea of proper authority. Here the idea is that it's only the legally constituted authority of the state, the ruler of the state, who has the right to go to war. And this is to avoid the situation that has happened in the past and sometimes continues to happen of a prince or a warlord or a local lord putting together their own private army and conducting war for personal purposes or private purposes. Since the advent of the United Nations in 1945, states that are signatories to the UN Charter have under most circumstances effectively agreed to cede their authority to use force in the international arena to the UN. However, there remain in practice many situations in which legitimate authority still lies with individual states, though UN approval of military action is the ideal.
The just war principle of proper authority was followed in the 1991 Gulf War. The UN Security Council had the responsibility under the UN Charter to act in cases of acts of aggression. the UN Security Council very unusually actually acted in order to state that what had happened in the invasion of Kuwait was an act of aggression and called on Iraq to immediately withdraw from Kuwait.
Related to the requirement of proper authority is the idea of public declaration, that a war, in order to be just, should also be declared. That principle is less well supported today than it once was, though it is obviously a good thing in the right circumstances.
The just war principle of proper declaration was made in the 1991 Gulf War. UN Security Council Resolution 678 stated that the Iraq had to withdraw from Kuwait, gave a deadline of the 15th of January, and stated that if this was not complied with, that all necessary means would be used to eject Iraq from Kuwait.
The third principle of the jus ad bellum is the requirement of right intention. This requirement demands that the objectives of a war must match up to the just cause that justifies that war in the first place. And this is to avoid states using legitimate just causes as an excuse to pursue other ends.
There were accusations made of wrong intention in the 1991 Gulf War. Many critics of the United States argued that its decision to get involved in ejecting Iraq from Kuwait was purely about oil. The fact that Kuwait had a large amount of the world's oil reserves.
An important distinction to remember when weighing the jus ad bellum principle of right intention is the difference between intention and motive. Your intention is what you plan to do, while your motive is why you want to do what you intend to do. What matters for a just war is intention, not motive. So, in the case of the 1991 Gulf War, we can see from what actually happened that the intention of the coalition was to drive Saddam Hussein's invading forces out of Kuwait. There's a clear match there between the just cause, which was resisting Saddam's aggression, and the intended course of action. Of course, it's likely that the many nations that participated in the so-called coalition of the willing had a wide range of motives for getting involved. But those motives don't really matter. It's what they intended to do that really counts. The three principles of jus ad bellum that we've looked at so far are both deontological in nature and the oldest of the principles, having been established by early just war thinkers like St. Augustine. Over time, however, additional principles of a consequentialist or prudential nature were added to the requirements for a just war. We look at those next.
So I'll now ask Senator Whish-Wilson to launch the book. As I said, he's a senator for Tasmania, member of the Australian Greens, and most importantly, UNSW Canberra graduate. Excuse me. Prior to his political career, Peter's worked as an economist, the owner of a successful vineyard, and a tireless advocate for Tasmania's stunning natural environment. He's also been a lecturer and researcher in economics at the University of Tasmania. So, Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. As you can tell from my well-lined suit and clean-shaven face, I'm also a graduate of the Australian Defence Academy, 1988, first graduating class. I'm here tonight for a really important reason. I had a Senate inquiry which I initiated into post-traumatic stress disorder and veteran suicide. And I happened to meet Professor Frame, who was one of our presenters, and he appeared in front of the Senate inquiry and gave a very compelling case that one of the potential motives for post-traumatic stress disorder is moral injury. And moral injury is a very interesting theory, and I understand is now being explored with considerable research. But intuitively, it made a lot of sense to me that some of these psychological issues that the committee was dealing with, and we have heard some very confronting evidence as we've gone around the country and met with veterans groups about the potential for moral injury, and it got me thinking a lot more about military ethics. So I was very pleased when Professor Frame sent me a copy of Key Concepts in Military Ethics. And it's an excellent book because it's a good entry point for a whole range of different people interested in this subject. And not just students and people in uniform, but also people like myself, politicians. So if it's simple enough for us to understand, then that's a good thing. It's also a bit more comprehensive than other things that I did a brief bit of research. I'm looking forward to seeing the extra chapters of what you showed us there. It was excellent. And I've taken some notes later for the panel in case I get asked any tricky questions. But it's also more comprehensive than just dealing with armed conflict. It looks at a much broader range of issues around military ethics. And interestingly enough, before I came here, unlike some other ministers, I don't always admit to using Wikipedia. I did use Wikipedia, but I did do a Google search on military ethics because I wanted to see what else was out there. And the first thing that came up was the US Defence Department. Obviously, it had a lot of hits, and they released the 15 worst examples of abuses of military. And what surprised me was a lot of them looked like they were corruption-related issues within an organisation, very similar to what we see in other organisations outside of defence. So it is a lot broader than just dealing with issues like moral injury and other dilemmas that are faced by defence personnel. And I think it's a big accolade, and it's a great, I suppose, advertisement for the University of New South Wales. And I will read it, the Australian Centre for the Study of Armed Conflicts and Society, in the fact that it's all 18 contributions that come from the Centre from either existing personnel here or previous. I don't know if I can use the word personnel when we're talking about academics. Well, I was a bit concerned you looked very militarised in your first presentation that you gave on the video. But it was a bit different in my day when I was here. But nevertheless, all the contributions have come from existing staff or postgraduates. And it's a really good advertisement for the centre. And of course, it's going to be used in conjunction with the massive open online course. And I've taught online courses myself at university, and I actually know that, well, my feeling and understanding is that is the way of the future. We are doing a lot more teaching now online, and the University of Tasmania did a course recently on something totally different, and ended up getting, I think, nearly 15,000 people signed up. So it's got huge potential to advertise not just this institution here, but the important subject, which I've got to say, and perhaps if I can finish on, it really, to me, from what I've seen, and I've picked up the defence portfolio recently for my party, the Greens, and we interact very closely with the other two parties. It's a really important subject, considering that we're now in a very broad national security frame at the moment. It's not just our involvement in armed conflicts overseas, but it's now a situation that everyday Australians are facing in the media, when they discuss these things with each other. A book like this and the concepts it explores, I think, are going to be very useful. So, for a champagne bottle, I'm happy to and officially open and launch the book, Key Concepts in Military Ethics, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So before we do the panel discussion, I'll just ask the Dean to come and respond briefly on behalf of the audience.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. I really appreciate those kind words. And you picked up on a lot of things that I think are important about the book and that I value about the book. And one of them is the range of contributors. One of my colleagues, when I handed him his copy, he said to me, "I never thought I'd see my name in an ethics book." But what we came to realize through this whole process was that ethics is not a kind of specialized thing that only philosophers do, although there are philosophers who do it and they do it very, very well. But applied ethics in particular touches on such a wide range of areas and disciplines that we realize what a great resource we have within our school of expertise. So it's just fantastic to have 18 different contributors within the school and or within the broader school community who've contributed to that. If anyone's ever done an edited book, it can sometimes be a pretty painful procedure. David's not even there. But this really was a painless experience because my colleagues were fantastically responsive. They bought into the vision of what it was. And I have to say a big thanks also to UNSW Press in that they agreed that we could use some of the chapters from the book in the MOOC for free, so we didn't have to worry about any copyright issues, which is always a challenge when you're creating a course that has free content. So we built it around that fundamental idea, and they came to the party on that, which was fantastic. We will have an opportunity to sign some books later, but one of the things that, as I've said, that just struck me was the kind of wide range of resources that people have that they brought to bear in this book. And I think no one really exemplifies that more than my colleague Professor Frame, Tom Frame, who's going to introduce the panel in just a minute, so I'll introduce him. Tom started his life as a naval officer. He was 16-year-old. He started as a junior cadet midshipman, is that right? And spent 14 years in the Navy. He then left the Navy and studied theology and became an ordained Anglican minister. He then became, after some time in the ministry in Civvy Street, he then became Anglican Bishop of the Armed Forces. After that, he moved on to head up to St Mark's Theological College here in Canberra, and he now is Director of Access. So that's a pretty full career, but in all that time, he's also managed to be incredibly productive in terms of his scholarly research. He's either written or edited more than 25 books, and it's getting close to 30 now. I wish I could be close to that. So he's a great example of someone with that wide range of experience and that real-world and academic background, which I think is perhaps the marker of this book and this course. So Tom, thank you very much for being willing to head up our panel.